Social Security and Medicare are headed for insolvency.
Heard for years now that Social Security may be insolvent by the year 2033.
A new report says Social Security could run out of funds sooner than expected.
Social Security and Medicare could run short of cash in the next decade.
Hi everyone, Kim One here. Today I have a few videos I would like to share with you on why you should opt out of Social Security. Let's get started.
Into the distant future. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that younger Americans make?
Well, one of the biggest mistakes is simply just to not start to save for retirement. And it's understandable when you are young. There's not a lot of extra money in your budget. You're paying student loans. Your rent is too high. And plus, like you said, retirement is way, way in the distance. You can't even see it. But that's precisely when it's important to start, because you really get more bang for your buck if you start young, due to the power of compound interest.
First statement right there, I would say young people will be able to save more if they didn't have to pay into Social Security and Medicaid. I pay about $3,500 each year into these programs. So let's say I was able to save $3,500 over the course of 4 years. 3,500 times 4 is $14,000 that I could use, to put into a high interest yielding savings account, or use to pay for like living expenses or put down on student loans. Let's jump ahead to minute mark 2:45.
You want to avoid late enrollment penalties if you miss your sign-up window, which is right around your 65th birthday.
Elizabeth, one last question for you, quickly, if we can. There's a lot of questions, especially among younger people, that with this silver tsunami, will retirement in a Social Security sense even be around for us? What's your take?
A really good question. We've seen a lot of headlines where the trust fund is running dry. Social Security will be around for today's young people, but it will probably look different. It will probably pay out less. So it's all the more reason to get an early start. You're going to be able to count on Social Security, but probably less than today's retirees do.
All right, Elizabeth O'Brien, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so what exactly will Social Security look like for my generation if it still exists when we go to retire? Also, if it's going to pay out less, do we have to keep paying the full amount of taxes we pay into Social Security, Medicaid, even though we're going to receive less if it still exists? Basically, what you're saying is that we're going to keep paying full price, so full taxes into these programs that we may not see, and that we're not going to, see back equal value. And that is something that we can't roll the dice on. We need to know exactly what we're going to get, if these programs still exist for us when we go to retire. Video number 2. Let's start at minute mark 145.
Forgo 12.4% of his or her compensation. And it's a bad deal. According to a 2016 Tax Foundation study, a worker retiring after making average wages could expect an annual payout from Social Security of about 20 grand. If that person had instead put just 10% of their annual earnings into a conservative IRA, they could expect an annual retirement income of almost 3 times more. Oh,
If this study is found to be accurate, then a person who could save 10% of their annual income could earn potentially an extra $37,700.
and don't think the government actually owes you anything when you retire, regardless of what you paid in. In 1960, the Supreme Court ruled in Fleming v. Nestor that there is no contractual right to receive Social Security benefits.
If we have no contractual rights to receive from Social Security and we're paying taxes into that program, then I'd rather not, pay taxes into this program if the government can just say we don't have to give you anything. Let's get into our third video.
This is all a scam. I mean, we got people that's getting ready to retire that's going to try to live off $2,000 to $3,000. Impossible. It's impossible. Because what happens, it comes up here, we spend it. We're 35 trillion in debt. We don't have any money. We're dead broke. And then taxpayers have $2 trillion in credit card debt. We are in huge trouble. In this body, we had better start figuring that out, because we're going to have a run on this city here soon, and there's going to be about 150 million people coming up here saying, where's our damn money? we paid in. I could have put my Social Security money 40 years in tax in the market and probably be worth 8 to 10 million today. But the federal government wasted. So I'll get off my horse there. It's good that we have this.
You heard it, folks. Straight from the mouth of a senator or congressman. He says if allowed to, instead of paying taxes into Social Security, if he could have invested that money himself over the course of 40 plus years into the markets, he could potentially have $8 to $10 million. Let's go ahead and pick up at minute mark 112.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out when Social Security was first founded, those who established it, it was started out as a 2% tax, and they said this will never take more than 6% of your income. Today it takes 12.4%, and depending on whether you go with CBO or Social Security trustees, it needs to take between 15.8 and 17.5%. So we're talking about thousands of dollars more per year.
When Social Security was first started, was only supposed to take 2 to 6% of your paycheck, and currently they're taking 12.4. And she's basically saying in order to keep it going, especially in the future, they would need to take 15.8% all the way up to 17.5% as of right now. So that's a 5.1 or 3.4% increase on your paycheck that you're being taxed. Let's go ahead and jump to minute mark 311.
Congress.
Have a 28, 29-year-old boy got a job, working hard, paying Social Security. They ask me all the time, Dad, will I ever see any of that money? Will they see it?
I think they will see some of it. That's the exact same thing I hear whenever I ask a group of younger workers, and none of them raises their hand. So I think that there will be something there, but it's not going to be what has been promised.
Yet another expert saying we're not going to get what we paid into the system back. Again, if Social Security does exist for my generation, what will it look like? For the end of this video, let's go ahead and jump to minute mark 422.
Retirement, we can deliver that for you.
Young people of all ages ask me, why can't we put our money in our own 401k instead of put it in Social Security? Is there an answer to that?
I think what I love is that they're asking the right question. Savings in any way is a good thing, and I think there's a place for Social Security, there's a place for pensions, and there's certainly a place for what we're doing in 401k plans.
Thank you.
Senator Hassan.
So instead of my generation paying taxes into Social Security and Medicaid, we can take, those extra tax dollars that we won't pay into those programs and put it into our traditional 401ks or Roth RRAs and things like that nature. We just got to change the rules. Let's go ahead and get into our fourth video.
Scott's proposal. 40 years have passed since the last time Congress made meaningful reforms to Social Security. And this time the shortfall is much larger, making any solution much harder. So why do politicians keep kicking the can down the road as the problem gets worse? Andrew Biggs, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, is a former Social Security Administration deputy commissioner.
Social Security reform involves breaking promises. Those promises maybe should never have been made in the first place, but they were made, and we now have to tell people that we can't keep them. They have to pay more and get less. Politicians don't like telling people that. They like telling them you're going to pay less and get more.
So why is the Social Security Trust Fund going broke? Young Voices commentator Travis Nix points out it's the way the program is structured.
Social Security functions like a pyramid scheme in that when you pay your payroll taxes, your money is not just sitting in a lockbox collecting interest. It's paying the current retirees. And so we don't have enough working young people right now to keep up with our aging population. So Social Security is going to run out of money earlier than any of us thought.
So first off, just to address Mr. Biggs' statement, no, we're not going to pay more and take less. And then lastly, to add to what Mr. Nix was saying, we also don't want to, hope and wish there's enough taxpayers for my generation to fund our golden years when we go to retire. So that's another reason why I believe we should opt out of Social Security and Medicaid. Let's go ahead and jump to minute mark 458.
During the 2000 presidential campaign, Republican candidate Steve Forbes proposed allowing workers to invest a portion of their Social Security payroll tax in the stock market, saying it would lead to greater financial returns. Critics called the idea risky, saying people would be gambling away their retirement. Biggs believes there's a better solution.
We're already taking a gamble by letting the government, take our extra tax dollars from our paycheck and put them into Social Security and Medicaid. We see how well those programs are, operating today. So I rather take, those extra tax dollars and invest it myself, and at least I have nobody to blame but myself. Lastly, to end this video, let's jump to minute mark 6:48.
Security, no. But this is the reason Social Security is called the third rail in politics. It's used all the time to drive votes, and no one really understands what's happening with this. I got an education and a tax course in law school where my professor was quite insistent that we all knew the trust fund was an illusion, that what was happening is money was going into Social Security as Social Security taxes, and he was quite clear, these are taxes. You are not paying into some fund with your name on it, and you're going to get your money back. You're paying taxes that are being distributed now, and the trust fund is being heavily borrowed against by the federal government to pay other obligations. So that's trading paper within the federal government. Is there a ton of money in the Social Security Trust Fund? The answer is no. It's been borrowed by the federal government. And when they talk about...
So yet again, someone else stating that we're not owed anything from Social Security, is just a tax. The government keeps borrowing money from it. That's why, Social Security will have to pay less, benefits to, retirees. Let's get into our fifth video.
Bankrupt if there's no money. Social Security is an integral part of the federal government. And as long as the federal government is not bankrupt, Social Security is not bankrupt.
What's really happening is the program is running out of treasury bonds, which are basically IOUs from the government. For many years, Social Security was taking in more money than it needed to pay out in benefits, so it lent money to the government to use for other programs, and it got IOUs in return.
Around 10 years ago, though, that situation flipped around. For the last decade, we've been paying out more in benefits than we've been collecting in Social Security revenue.
But because the program had so many IOUs stashed away from previous years, it's been able to keep paying benefits in full by cashing in on those IOUs.
Right now, there's roughly $3 trillion in IOUs. But each year, that $3 trillion stash gets a little bit smaller. By the year 2034, all of the IOUs will have been cashed in.
That means retirees would see overnight about a 25% benefit cut.
This number will likely increase as the number of workers per retiree continues to fall.
Okay, so he says that Social Security is owed about $3 trillion, but in a previous video, I calculated Social Security to be owed about $6.1 trillion. And then about 5 months ago, the Wall Street Journal released a video where they stated that Social Security is owed over $5 trillion. So as of right now, it seems no one knows or is willing to say what the real number is, and that is a problem. Let's go ahead and jump to minute mark 358.
Every generation that's coming up behind.
They might be asked to pay a slightly higher payroll tax. More important, they might be asked to work a little bit longer.
And like most things in the economy, Social Security's funding shortfall isn't an isolated issue.
It's one of the reasons the federal budget deficit is as large as it is. It means that we have to borrow money, which means issuing bonds. That tends to put up pressure on interest rates, which means it's harder to afford a house. It means that Congress might have to cut spending on other programs like the military or the environment in order to make sure there's enough money for Social Security.
So what needs to happen to put Social Security on more sound footing? Congress needs to pass a law.
Congress has stood still and not enhanced Social Security since Richard Nixon.
When and what kind of law, that we still don't know. There's been a number of proposed solutions over the years.
This legislation demands that the wealthiest people in this country start paying their fair share of taxes.
But policymakers generally disagree on whether to raise taxes or cut benefits.
You'll have two approaches to how to solve this problem, and you're not going to do it.
There's probably no single magic bullet which will put Social Security on a long-term footing. Instead, Congress is probably going to have to look at a variety of steps which will collectively fix the problem.
But economists don't expect action to be taken anytime soon.
Everybody, including on Capitol Hill, knows that Social Security has a problem. Nobody, especially those at Capitol Hill, are prepared to do anything about it.
As we all apparently.
So in the video, the gentleman states that in order to save Social Security, that the government, Congress may have to cut military spending and spending on the environment. One thing for sure is the government's not and cannot afford to cut military spending. That just won't happen. And then lastly, to resolve Social Security and the national debt, America needs to implement a Domestic Debt Forgiveness Act and U.S. citizens' government debt forgiveness package. Finally, our last video.
A few options for restructuring the program. Let's talk about the top 5 in a very bland and unbiased way, starting with the high earners.
A lot of very wealthy people, they don't get their money through salaries. Like, I make more in a salary than Jeff Bezos does, for example. And so he pays less in Social Security than I do.
Thanks, Jeff. At least one bill is fighting to add a Social Security tax to high investment income, which is where a lot of rich people make and keep their money. Then there's this. We could remove or change that $168,000 salary cap.
The most popular.
The wealthy will just find or create another loophole to curve this. That's all that's going to happen. Let's go ahead and jump to minute mark 6:18.
To send people into a rage, but they are kind of the most obvious. Raising the payroll tax would immediately start pumping more money into Social Security and help offset the imbalance of beneficiaries and workers. And cutting the amount each person can actually receive would balance those scales even further. But this is wildly unpopular across party lines and with the public. Granted, if Congress were to do nothing, in 2033 benefits would automatically decrease. And this option? You've probably heard this before. It did not go over well in France.
Raising the full retirement age is a benefit cut, full stop, for everybody. It means 7% lower benefits over a lifetime on average for each year that you raise the retirement age.
We're not raising anything. Just allow those of us that want to be cashed out. And we're not accepting less if we're still paying full price. Based off the solutions I've heard and the half thought out answers given on how to save Social Security, at this point, just cash me out. I'd rather take the chances myself and invest that money wisely and have no one else to blame than to be stuck into the system. Let me know what you guys all think down in the comments below. Also, please leave a like and subscribe.